Sawhorses. Probably the most underappreciated tool that has ever existed, but try building anything without a set of them. This is a humble tool that is essential on any project.
They can also be offensively expensive to buy at the hardware store. But that's not a problem. Today we're going to build our own. We're going to use reclaimed lumber. We're going to use the screws and the nails that are out on the bench. We're not going to get too fancy about it. We're going to build a couple sawhorses for next to nothing that'll last a decade. Stay tuned.
A few weeks back, I was working on the old abandoned cabin, and I have this old deck here that needed to be torn apart. It's made with all-weather wood, and the wood's still in pretty good shape, even though it's just been laying on the ground and neglected for decades. So that's what we're going to use. We're going to use the reclaimed lumber from this old deck to build our sawhorses. By all means, use whatever you have on hand. But whatever you do, don't go buy new lumber. Sawhorses don't need to be fancy. They just need to hold things up. For the lengths of sawhorses, I like to use either a 1x6 or a 1x8. A 1x8 is preferable, but I have 1x6s. I just need to knock the nails out of them. Once I've got the nails all knocked out, I'm going to cut these into sawhorse legs. I want my sawhorses about that wide. We're going to call that 40 inches. Now I just need a rough idea how tall I want these sawhorses. This tailgate's a little higher than I'd probably like to work most of the time. Not only that, but the legs are not going to be straight up and down. They're going to have an angle to them. We're going to go with about 32 inches. About 32 by about 40. Now you can build sawhorses that don't have legs that have an angle to them. Their legs can go straight down from the sides of the sawhorse. But I like a little bit of angle to my legs. So I will measure out the height I want and then put an angle on my pattern. And then I'll cut every single leg to match that pattern. Now you can use a speed square or you can just eyeball it. Make the angle whatever you want it to be. The sawhorse is rarely ever going to be sitting perfectly flat on perfectly flat ground. Now once I have one leg cut, I'm just going to use that as the pattern for the rest. I need a pair of sawhorses, 4 legs per sawhorse. I need 8 legs. You know, the real irony is I don't want to work on my tailgate. It's awkward and it's uncomfortable. I wish I had a pair of sawhorses handy so that I could work off the sawhorses building sawhorses. Everything you could build would be better if it was up waist high at a comfortable level and on a stable platform. Even building a set of sawhorses would be more enjoyable if you were working off a set of sawhorses. Matter of fact, I can't wait to get these done because working off the tailgate sucks, even for a short amount of time. Now for the top of the sawhorse, I'm going to want something solid, so I'm going to use this 2x10 that came out of that deck. You don't want to use 1x material for the top of the sawhorse. You want something that's going to have some meat because you're going to be screwing the legs or nailing them into the top portion of the sawhorse. Now I'm not going to leave this as a 10-inch wide board. I'm going to cut it down. And I'm also going to put a little bit of a bevel to this top so the legs splay out. You'll see here in just a second. I only need about a 2x6. So I'm going to cut my 2x6 from whichever side is the better side. Obviously, I'm not going to leave this in there. With this board, there's a pretty good check on one side, and there's some wane that needs to come off of the other side. So I'll get my 2x6 out of this side, and I will make sure that that wane gets cut off and isn't part of the board. In a nutshell, get the best board you can out of the board that you have, and just cut off the stuff that's least desirable to keep.
Now the question is really, how much angle do you want on your legs? Do you want them to spread way out, which you don't probably. You want them perfectly straight up. You don't want that either. What you want is kind of a happy, solid medium. You just kind of get the idea of what you want, and you can eyeball it with the blade.
I'm really using no other criteria than that's about the angle that looks right to me. And as far as how wide I want to cut the top piece, well, once again, just kind of what looks right. You can see when the legs are nailed off to the top piece, they're going to have about the right spread. Now, fasteners are very important, so I like to use whatever I have handy. Now all we're going to do is we're going to screw the legs into the top part of the sawhorse. Now all of these legs have an angle cut on each end of them, and they're all exactly the same because I've cut them all off of one pattern. I just make sure that they're flush with the top and then screw them off. Now you could try to work on a 2x12 suspended across two buckets, or you could try to work on the back of the tailgate like I'm doing right now, but you kind of come to find that sawhorses are a tool that don't really have an acceptable substitute. One thing should be noted about height. If you're short, make them short. If you're tall, make them tall. If you're working on something that should be higher up off the ground, make them whatever you believe would be the best height. There really is no right answer. I'm also using about 6 different kinds of screws here because that's what I had extras of in the junk fastener drawer. But you could nail your sawhorses together and that would do just as well. Also, if you have a tube of construction adhesive handy, it wouldn't hurt anything to glue these things together before you screw them. There's your basic sawhorse form. Now, of course, these aren't done. They're going to be quite flimsy as they are. They're going to need a gusset on the end of the legs to keep the legs from splaying out or caving in. We're going to cut our gussets from the finest material, whatever's handy. In my lifetime, I think I've built 5 sets of sawhorses. For all the building projects I've ever been on, 5 sets of sawhorses. And I probably still have 4 of them. I have a pair in Alaska, I have a pair in the Upper Peninsula. Brooke has a pair that she's got somewhere at the moment. And this would probably be my 5th pair. I don't think I've ever had a sawhorse fail or rot out or just give away. They pretty much last indefinitely. About the only way you're ever going to ruin a sawhorse is if you're making a cut in very thin material and you have the blade of a skill saw set really, really deep. You could always cut right through the top, which of course would ruin them, but I've never had that happen yet. Now I'm using plywood for the end, for these gussets, but you could use anything. I've actually used a chunk of tongue and groove, 8-inch pine tongue and groove before. I've used OSB, which is not as nice, and everything works just as good as the next. Now you can leave the top portion of these sawhorses long and sticking out, or you can trim them up if you like that look better.
There you have it, a couple super easy sawhorses. Now these things are quick, easy, cheap. You don't have to cut the ends off. As a matter of fact, they're a little stronger if you leave the ends sticking out past the plywood. But if the ends are cut off, they will stack a touch nicer. Now, there's no rules when it comes to making sawhorses. You can make them as high or as low as you'd like. You can make them as long or as short as you'd like. It's just to match them to the work that you plan on doing. Well, I hope you guys have enjoyed this quick and dirty sawhorse build. It was just one way to do it. Of course, you got some 1x, you got some 2x6s, you got a couple chunks of plywood. Doesn't take much time at all to put a set of these together. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. My name's Dave Whipple, and you've been watching Bush Radical. And be radical, eh? See you soon.